You know, I've been around for a while. Met some interesting people. Done some crazy things. So you just might think that there's not much that can take me by surprise. You'd be wrong. The world is full of stories, science and things that amaze and confound me. Every single day, incredible mysteries that keep me awake at night. Some I can answer. Others just defy logic.
Is there life after death? In Connecticut, a man visits a Civil War battlefield where he is suddenly overcome with emotion.
To this day, I don't understand what exactly happened.
Is he the reincarnation of a dead general? In Haiti, 18 years after his death, a man returns from the grave.
This individual had clearly been pronounced dead by the doctors.
Do zombies really exist? And in a remarkable experiment, scientists in England conduct a series of groundbreaking seances. Is it our first genuine proof of the afterlife?
Yeah. It's a weird world, and I love it. Death. Not exactly pretty. Especially when you consider that one day all of us could end up looking like this. But should we simply accept this as our fate, or is there something else that awaits us? Since the dawn of time, humans have been obsessed with the idea that there's something more than this. Well, is there? Do our lives go on even if we die? Can we return and communicate with our loved ones here on Earth? Is there life after life? And perhaps the most important question of all, can we prove it? Well, just maybe we can.
Jeffrey Keane is a retired firefighter. In 1990, he decided to visit the site of the famous Battle of Antietam, one of the bloodiest encounters of the Civil War, and a place where thousands died in just one day.
I was traveling down through Pennsylvania with my wife, antique hunting, and I asked my wife if it was okay if we took a little side trip over to Antietam to see the battlefield.
But what begins as a fun day out will soon turn into a nightmare.
My wife wasn't very much into history, so she remained in the car, and I walked over to where the battle had taken place at the sunken road. Gone about 50 feet when it became very hard to breathe. I started crying. I was very angry. I was very sad. If you take the saddest you've ever been and magnify that by about 1,000 times, that gets close. I was exhausted. I couldn't tell exactly what was going on. I thought I was maybe having a heart attack, but I didn't have any pain.
Overcome by a wave of violent emotions, Jeffrey then has a powerful urge to visit the gift shop.
I felt compelled to go there. I threw a magazine on the counter. I said, I want this, and it was a Civil War quarterly magazine on Antietam. To this day, I don't understand what exactly happened.
For the next 18 months, Jeffrey's life returns to normal. Until one night, when he attends a Halloween party.
It was a really nice party. They'd spent a lot of money on the decorations. They had hired a palm reader. And I sat down in front of this woman, and she took my hands, and I told her the story of what happened in Antietam.
As Jeff tells his story, the palm reader suddenly becomes uneasy.
She's sitting there shaking her head, and she dropped my hands a few times.
And then she drops a bombshell. She believes Jeffrey was at Antietam in a previous life.
She said, you died there, but you hung around for a long time. I said, just let me ask you one question. Are you sure he was dead? She said he was full of holes. That's one thing I'll never forget.
The bizarre encounter will lead Jeffrey on a journey in search of the truth.
The next day, I took my wife to work, and I remembered the magazine that I had to have. I had it for a year and a half and hadn't read it. I opened it up to the section on Antietam where I had had the experience. And my eyes skimmed down the page, and I see a photograph of a general.
As Jeffrey stares at the photo, he is stunned by what he sees.
I look over, and this picture says General John B. Gordon. And when I see the face, I tell people I know the face very well. I shave it every morning. And unless you're unfeeling, unthinking, completely drained of any type of emotion, it's going to have a bit of an effect on you, even if it's just awe and wonder.
Remarkably, Jeffrey is a double for General John B. Gordon. But as he reads on, things get even weirder.
I read in the story he had been wounded 5 times that day. He was shot through the face, and I figured he had probably been killed there.
John B. Gordon was a general of the 6th Alabama Regiment, a hero who was shot in the bloody Battle of Antietam. Could there be a link between Jeffrey and a general who had died nearly 200 years before him? Suddenly, Jeffrey makes another startling connection.
It was on my 30th birthday. At 12 midnight, I got such an horrendous pain in my jaw. It radiated down into my neck. I know what it feels like to be shot through the face. That's how bad it hurt.
Was Jeffrey's mysterious pain somehow related to General Gordon's injuries?
Gordon was 30 years old when he was shot through the face. Same age. That was 10, 15 years before I ever heard Gordon's name. It wasn't like this was worked backwards. I heard about Gordon's wounding. I went over to the hospital, made him fudge up some documents that mimicked the wound that Gordon had more than 100 years before. Kind of hard to do. And I have the documents to prove the hospital visit.
Could all these remarkable similarities be explained by coincidence? Jeffrey believes there's only one answer.
I don't need any more proof that there's reincarnation because of all the things that happen to me. We never die. We're continuous. We always have been, we always will be. That's how Gordon found me at Antietam. I always say it's the other way around from what people think. I say Gordon found me where our hearts touched at Antietam.
What an extraordinary story. Did a Civil War general who died over a century ago reincarnate, jump into Jeffrey Keene's body, and continue his life through Jeffrey's eyes? Are we all in a continual cycle of birth and rebirth, simply interchanging bodies as we go? And if so, this raises yet another question. Do we get to choose? I mean, who was I before I was who I am now, and who will I be next? Could I be you? Now that is definitely weird. But what?
Dr. Cynthia Myersberg is a Harvard psychologist. She believes reincarnation is simply a function of how we deal with memories.
Something odd happens, and people go looking, as we all do, to make sense of their lives. If you have a rich imaginative ability, it becomes very difficult to distinguish between something that's a record of perception and a record of imagination. Did I dream that, or did it happen? Did I hear about that, or did I actually experience that? It can be very difficult.
Cynthia believes that one way we do this is by creating false memories.
False memories are what they sound like. The recollections for either events that didn't take place or didn't take place in the way in which they're remembered.
Are people like Jeffrey just making their stories up? If so, why?
Memory, although it feels a lot of times like we're watching a film in our mind's eye, that's not what's really happening. We're always reconstructing it from little pieces that we have saved, in a sense, and we put it back together. And our brain fills in for us the missing parts.
Researchers have been able to study this phenomenon.
It's possible to induce false memories in a matter of moments. For instance, if someone sees a doctored photograph showing him or her as a child in a hot air balloon, people can very quickly form memories for it. The way we measure false memory propensity in the lab is we use something called the DRM, or Dease-Roediger-McDermott paradigm. What the paradigm consists of is we present people with lists of words. In our lab, they listen to them. Then they're asked to write down, without guessing, only those words they're certain they've heard. What makes the task tricky is that each list of words, there's a word that isn't on the list but is related to all the words on the list. So the words might be sour, bitter, sugar, honey, and so forth. But the word sweet is never said. In the lab, past life memory participants were much more likely to endorse having heard words that they didn't actually hear. However, they were no different in terms of being able to correctly identify words that they did hear. So they were more likely to have false memories of words they didn't hear, but their true memory looked just like the control participants. I interpret it to mean that although there's no difference in ability to form true recollections and true memories, there's an increased vulnerability to form memories for events that perhaps did not occur.
Can Jeffrey Keen's claim of reincarnation be dismissed as a series of false memories? Does it explain what struck him down?
People come to believe they have past lives because something weird happens, something that's outside of the norm in some way for them that they need an explanation for.
Is reincarnation real, or simply a product of our minds? Do we all have past, present, and future lives?
We know so little about the nature of reality that I think it'd be very, very foolish to say that this cannot happen.
An emotional collapse at a Civil War battleground leads a man to believe he is the reincarnation of a dead general. Is it possible we all have past lives? Tariq Sator is the facilitator at the Ontario Hypnosis Center. He not only believes reincarnation is real, he can demonstrate it using a process called past life regression.
Past life regression is a series of steps that you go through in order to access memories from previous lifetimes. It is allowing the conscious mind to be put aside for a while as you access the subconscious mind. Begin by just lightly closing your eyes now.
Tariq is preparing a patient, Karen, to travel back not only deep into her own past, but to lives she may have lived before, and from where he can access her memories.
Imagine, if you will, above your head is a point of absolutely pure white light. It starts by first taking the client back through age regression, and typically it's about 14 or 15 years old, and then to 3 or 4 years old.
I'm on my mom's lap and I'm getting all of her attention.
Karen has now gone back over 30 years. The next step will take her into what is known as blue mist, a space in between her current life and the one she lived before.
Take a deep breath now and go beyond the blue mist, finding yourself at a still earlier time.
Incredibly, it appears Karen has now entered a former life.
I am climbing rocks and there's a forest nearby.
Are you male or female?
I'm male. I think I'm hunting.
Okay.
Tariq believes what Karen is seeing is real.
They're interacting, they're in the body of that past life. They can see out of that person's eyes. It's very, very personal.
To complete the session, Tariq must reverse the process and bring Karen back into her current life and present age.
And 1, eyes open, back.
Did Karen actually visit her former life? Is past life regression evidence that reincarnation is real? Dr. Stuart Hameroff is a scientist. He believes the only way to find real proof of reincarnation is by using science.
There's a lot of anecdotal evidence for apparent reincarnation, but it's been dismissed because it seems irrational. Now we have a theory, a possible explanation, so I think all this evidence needs to be reevaluated and considered seriously.
Hameroff's theory concerns one of the greatest mysteries of both religion and science: the soul.
I think the soul is our consciousness, the sum total of our memories and conscious awareness, and I think it can exist outside the body after life and possibly in reincarnation.
But even more remarkable is that Hameroff thinks the soul exists as a series of information, quantifiable by physics.
I think a quantum version of consciousness can give rise to something like a quantum soul that can account for a lot of these anecdotal stories that we've been hearing for eons.
Many scientists believe consciousness exists with cells in the brain, but Hameroff thinks it exists on a subatomic level in quantum particles that can stay connected and survive death.
When a patient has a cardiac arrest and is resuscitated, they often tell a story of a white light, a tunnel, and in many cases floating above their body looking down on what's going on. This could be consciousness as quantum information dissipating. When the patient's resuscitated, the quantum information goes back and the patient wakes up and reports having had a near-death experience and perhaps even an out-of-body experience.
It's an incredible theory. But if our souls do exist in quantum form, how are they reincarnated?
It's conceivable that this quantum information, the quantum soul, if you will, could re-enter an embryo, which would be reincarnation.
Do our souls consist of information that can travel even into an embryo? Have we solved one of the greatest mysteries in the universe?
We know so little about the nature of reality that I think it'd be very, very foolish to say that this cannot happen. And with the anecdotal evidence from reincarnation and memories and past life and so forth, it seems to me that it may be more logical to assume that it does occur.
Was Jeffrey Keane the reincarnation of a long-dead general? Or did false memories convince him it was true? Does the soul exist independent of our bodies? Can we visit past lives? And if we can, what will we find? Weird? Or what? Scientists in England conduct a series of groundbreaking experiments. Did they find the first genuine proof of the afterlife?
Hello. Hello. I don't know about you, but I've always been scared of things that go bump in the night. Fred! Most of them we can explain, but what about those we can't? Are we surrounded by spiritual entities, the remains of those that have passed from this life? Are they what we call ghosts? And if they are there, are they friendly? And can we communicate with them? Fred!
In 1993, a team of researchers in the town of Scole, United Kingdom, set out to find indisputable evidence of life after death. Conducting a series of extraordinary séances, they witnessed paranormal events that would mystify science. They called it the Scole experiment.
What we didn't know was that it was going to become very, very special and work in a pioneering way to provide proof of life after death.
Robin Foy led the séances. He believes the experiment was unique because of their attempts to make sure it was credible.
It was important for us to show to the outside world that we'd taken every security precaution that we could to ensure that the work was fraud-proof.
To conquer the skeptics, the seances were held in the supposedly impenetrable cellar of a suburban house.
The whole place was brick. There were no trapdoors. The only door into the cellar was locked internally. Each one of us would wear luminous armbands so that everybody who was present could see that no one moved. We were using a table which was actually fraud-proof so that nobody could get under it and do anything at all. We were seeking to actually get viable proof that we live on after we die.
The Scole experiment began in November 1993. As Robin Foy and his team assembled in their cellar, they had no idea what might happen. But it didn't take long to find out.
After a short while, the spirit lights come, little lights about the size of a pea or slightly larger, very bright, and they would sort of perform aerobatics. Later on, there were spirit voices speaking from mid-air. We were able to hear on a one-to-one basis all of the spirit people. Everybody in that room would be regularly touched by spirit hands.
As the experiment continues, the team is amazed as the paranormal activity becomes more intense.
All sorts of different things would materialize in midair and then fall down onto the table.
We would hear the bang as that hit the table. We may actually have solid spirit personalities moving around in the room. We were pushing the bounds of psychic research further forward than anyone been able to produce or witness anywhere in the past.
Encouraged by the success, Foy decided to try something extraordinary. Something that would prove they had made contact with the afterlife.
We were doing an experiment with a film that was still in its plastic container. We would have this locked into a security box to ensure that nothing was ever done by us to that film.
It was a remarkable and ambitious idea. The team hoped a spirit might somehow implant an image on the film inside the box. If so, it could be the proof they were looking for. When they finally checked the film, they couldn't believe their eyes.
That was quite amazing.
We had hundreds of photographs that were produced to show us various aspects of the spirit world itself. Some of them were so fantastic they really would knock your socks off.
But there was one photograph that was different from the rest. A haunting image of what seemed to be a woman's face.
You actually see on this one areas of this person's face.
Who is the woman? And how did her image appear on the film? Foy believes this chilling incident makes the Scole experiment the definitive exploration into the presence of the afterlife.
The Scole experiment, I think, was very, very important because it went further than anybody had ever been able to go before in proving the real existence of life after death.
Despite his claims, many skeptics doubted the results. Did Robin Foy and his team of researchers make contact with the other side? Is the Scole experiment proof that there is life after death? Or could it have been an elaborate fake? One way to find out is to try it for ourselves. A UK research team experiences a remarkable series of paranormal events during a series of seances. Did they find proof of life after death? Brian Dunning is a scientific journalist. He believes the events of Scole were nothing more than an illusion.
Here's the problem with seances, is that seances have existed as a magic trick for 200 years. They are an illusionist giving the impression that spirits are in the room. They are a magic trick. It's almost impossible to envision a seance being done seriously by people. They're always performances. So that's why, yeah, it's hard to take a seance seriously.
What we are trying to recreate are the famous Scole experiments.
Was the Scole experiment a magic trick? To test Dunning's theory, we've set up a fake seance using a professional illusionist. To create the conditions at Scole, the participants are sitting in pitch darkness. Using night vision cameras, we can see them, but they can see nothing at all. The session begins with everyone holding hands.
Give me your hand here and your hand here. Please do not break the psychic circle at any time during the seance. Spirits, are you with us tonight?
The Scole experiment claimed that spirit voices seemed to come from midair. The illusionist will attempt to recreate them with an assistant using a cardboard tube as a megaphone.
Speak to us.
She will always love you.
Whoa.
Faking disembodied voices seems simple.
Charles, the name Charles.
But can they convince
Yes.
these participants
That was close.
they are being physically touched by spirits as claimed by the people at Scole?
My spirit guide, I'm going to ask my spirit guide, Francine, will you give us a physical manifestation? I want Francine to come towards the center of the table. What? What happened?
Don't touch me.
About yourself! Whoa, whoa, whoa!
The final trick centers around the claim that objects materialized out of thin air. Is this so easy to disprove?
Leave us now! Leave us! Ah!
The experiment is over. Even though his seance was badly faked, the participants are left visibly shaken.
Nobody's laughing. Everybody took that completely seriously. It was a very powerful experience for these people.
Although the participants were fooled, Brian believes this proves the Scole experiment was a hoax.
We saw a few of the things today that were reported from the Scole experiments. We've seen that those can be easily faked. Do we know that they faked them at Scole? No, of course not, because no controls were applied. We don't know what actually happened. But when we see how easy it is to fake it, how can we know that these could have been real?
Could the greatest experiment into the existence of the afterlife be just an illusionist's game? No doubt. Magic tricks are easy to perform, and many of the claims made at Scole have been dismissed out of hand. But the biggest mystery of all still remains unanswered. Who is this woman? And how did her image appear on a roll of film that was locked inside a box? Even Houdini would have trouble with that one.
Peter Schramek is a photography expert. We asked him to examine images from the Scole experiment and try to unlock one of its biggest mysteries.
As I understand it, the film was put into this box and locked away, and the exposure, the effect on the film, was supposed to have happened while the film was locked up in this box. My first reaction was, this is an interesting manipulation. I assumed it was something that would have been done in the darkroom. It looks very similar to the kinds of distortions, collages, manipulations that people have done in the darkroom because it's fun to do.
But there was no darkroom at Scole. Was this photograph created by the spirit of a woman? Peter believes the answer to the mystery lies in the type of film they used.
With Polaroid, you have the direct development, so there's no darkroom involved. When you process it, you actually put it into a container that is full of a gelatinous chemical that gets spread onto the film evenly. And that is the chemical that develops the film, contains the dyes that causes the color, and so on. And so you have this jelly-like substance that's being spread over the film to develop it. You're cranking that through by hand or sometimes by motor. And depending on how you crank it, you can get different kinds of distortions and effects simply because for chemical reasons. And that, in my mind, is what's happened in these photographs. All you're seeing are the chemicals that are the way that they've affected the film as it's gone through. What is harder to explain are the actual faces in the images. They're not light effects, they're not chemical effects, they actually are, images of faces.
So how was this haunting image created?
My explanation for that would be that the film has been tampered with, and the film has been put through the camera, and these faces have been exposed into it prior to the supposed experiment. And then when it's processed, these show up, but they show up in this distorted fashion because of the chemical processing distortion. And that actually is quite easy. You can take a roll of film. I can take this sort of brand new roll of film. No one's ever done anything with it. I can take it. I can put this film in the camera. I can shoot the roll of film. I can wind it back. And as I wind it back, I can leave the leader sticking out like this. And no one knows whether this film is exposed or not.
Peter believes he has solved the mystery. But what if the Scole researchers were telling the truth?
I don't think while the film was in the box that any of the effects that we're seeing could have been created unless one believes in some sort of supernatural explanation.
Is this a woman from the spirit world? Did Robin Foy and his research team find proof of life after death at Scole? Or was it an ingenious hoax? Whatever the truth is, this is weird, or what? In Haiti, a man dies after a sudden and mysterious illness. 18 years later, he returns from the grave. Could this prove that zombies exist?
When it comes to the mysteries of the afterlife, perhaps there's nothing weirder than zombies. The dictionary describes a zombie like this: the body of a dead person given the semblance of life, but made mute and willless by a supernatural force, usually for some evil purpose. Sounds like my bank manager. But could it be true? Could mindless, shuffling cannibals actually exist outside of Hollywood?
The tiny nation of Haiti is home to many mysteries, but none weirder than the tale of a man named Clairvius Narcisse. Wade Davis is an explorer and author. He investigated the case, which began in 1962 when Narcisse suddenly became violently ill.
I mean, the constellation of symptoms that he reported were so strange that you initially thought this had to be coming from the realm of science fiction.
Although doctors work feverishly, it's too late to save the stricken Narcisse.
The death was witnessed by both the physicians and nurses and his own family members, and his sister had actually affixed her thumbprint to the death certificate, verifying that this was her brother had died.
Devastated, family members say their final goodbyes, and Clairvius is finally laid to rest.
You could go to his gravesite, where the slab of cement had been placed upon his grave shortly after his demise.
It should have been the last anyone heard of Clairvius Narcisse. But 18 years later, something incredible will happen that ensures no one forgets his name. In 1980, Clairvius' sister is going about daily chores in her family village. Suddenly, she sees something beyond comprehension. Standing before her is her deceased brother. Clairvius Narcisse has risen from the dead.
He claimed that he was buried. He claimed that he was magically resuscitated by a sorcerer, and that led off to the north of the country, where he had been working as a sort of a zombie slave for 18 years. Now, clearly there's no incentive, economic incentive, to create an indentured force of labor in a country where costs of labor are trivial. I think the idea of slavery ties into a deeper concept, which is that the essence of a zombie is someone who has lost their soul. But in addition to being cast in perpetuity into this state of kind of limbo, you're also said to be made a slave. And of course, given the colonial history, that combines to create a kind of a phenomena that's almost worse than death, because you lose your personal willpower and your physical freedom. And together that combines to make the plight of a zombie the worst possible fate of the individual, which is precisely why in Haiti, the fear is not of zombies, as the movies imply, the bad movies, but of becoming a zombie.
Did Clairvius Narcisse return from the dead? A zombie?
There was no question that this individual had clearly been pronounced dead by the doctors. And then the question became, why? How? What happened to him?
This incredible story attracts the attention of a team of scientists who are keen to examine the case and uncover the truth.
They investigated all these lines of evidence, analysis of the fingerprints by forensic experts, the testimony of the family members and the doctors.
After months of searching, the investigators come to a remarkable conclusion.
Really led two very reputable scientists to go public saying they had found the first provable instance of a zombie.
What did the scientists find? Did Clairvius Narcisse rise from the dead? Do zombies exist? Stephen Schlossman is a Harvard psychiatrist. Incredibly, he believes the answer could be yes.
When I started thinking about how I would explain zombies medically, it was kind of a lark, and then it ended up getting a little creepy. The typical zombie, in my view, is slow, shambling, can't figure even the simplest of dilemmas out, wants to eat human flesh. There is ways you can medically explain the behavior.
Remarkably, Schlossman believes just a few changes in the human brain could turn one of us into one of them. It starts with the cerebellum.
This is a sheep brain, but imagine this is a human brain, which looks an awful lot like this, just bigger. The function of the cerebellum is to help us maintain balance. In zombies, we've got to think that there's something not right with their cerebellum, because zombies are really not balanced well. They hold their hands out so they can maintain balance. They've got that wide-based gait. They've got truncal ataxia, which is when the trunk of the body moves back and forth and up and down. That's all cerebellar disease. And it's easy to sort of think that whatever causes the zombie plague must take a whack at the cerebellum. There's a number of diseases that can affect the cerebellum. In those cases, you have exactly the shambling gait that you see in the zombie movies.
The shuffling is one thing, but what explains a zombie's mindless violence?
The amygdala is the most primitive part of the brain. It's the region of the brain that has very base emotions.
Our amygdala is the source of all anger and rage. But it's kept in check by our frontal lobes, the most advanced part of our brain.
So we might have an impulse when somebody cuts us off on the road to yell at them, to tailgate them, to do something not nice. The frontal lobe jumps in and stops you from doing that. When we watch zombie movies, we can guess that zombie frontal lobes are pretty much gone. They can't hold back their impulses.
Could a unique combination of brain injuries somehow create a zombie? There's just one problem.
The zombie, by definition, has to die and be reanimated. There is no medical basis for something coming back from the dead so far.
But how does Schlossman explain that Clairvius Narcisse was certified dead, buried, then returned from the grave?
Maybe he's not telling the truth. Maybe he's undergone some kind of neurologic insult that prevents him from remembering what's just happened. But if we're talking about really rising from the dead, that doesn't happen.
A Haitian man dies from a mysterious illness, then returns from the grave 18 years later. Is he proof that zombies exist? Wade Davis has investigated the case and has an incredible theory. He thinks Clairvius Narcisse didn't die at all, that something made him just seem to be dead. But who or what could have fooled the doctors?
There are lots of drugs that can kill, but to find a drug that brings you to the doorway of death and then brings you back into the realm of the living would be remarkable indeed.
In 1982, Davis made a breakthrough. He discovered that Haitian voodoo priests were rumored to be using a special poison to turn people into zombies. Was this the drug he was looking for? He decided to visit Haiti and see for himself.
Through a series of negotiations, I was able to get a local priest to make this poison for me. I collected all the raw ingredients, which ranged from, dried toads to dried fish, dried snakes, plants, human remains. I collected all the raw ingredients so I could identify them taxonomically. All the different stages of the elaboration, because fundamentally the ingredients are roasted on a grill, pounded in a mortar and pestle, sifted to create this sort of powder. And I brought them all back through U.S. Customs, and it was kind of amusing because I came through for the first day on Easter Sunday, 1982, Kennedy Airport, and I had no permits whatsoever, and I had this suitcase made of surplus 7-Up cans that had been printed in Saudi Arabia because you could see the Arabic script, and it was filled to the gunnels with all these ingredients, including human remains, a human skull. I had a live Bufo marinus toad, the biggest toad, this big, in my backpack, and no permits whatsoever. And I opened this up, and the customs guy in New York just slammed it shut, and he said, and I quote, "Look, it's Easter Sunday. I don't know who the you are. I didn't even want to have to work today. Just get the out of here."
Back in the U.S., Davis takes the poison to be tested in a lab. He finds something extraordinary. It contains a chemical more deadly than cyanide.
A tetrodotoxin acts by physically blocking nerves, but it brings on a state of apparent death so profound that it has many times fooled physicians.
Had the Haitian priests discovered a drug that could replicate death? If so, where did they get it?
In Haiti, there's this sort of famous puffer fish, which inflates like a big porcupine. Without doubt, the Haitian sorcerers had identified a natural product that contained a toxin that could make someone appear to be dead.
Could this powerful drug produce the symptoms Narcisse experienced?
He said he was paralyzed. He could hear himself pronounced dead. He could sense the sheet pulled over his eyes. He heard his sister begin to wail, but he could not respond.
Was an innocent man turned into a zombie? The evidence seems undeniable, except for one thing.
No one knows if Narcisse was administered the poison. What we do know is that he was pronounced dead when he turned back into the realm of the living. So presumably, if any of this is accurate, somehow he received the poison. According to what he said, the poison was rubbed into the skin. And this is important because the folkloric idea that you read in the literature is that the poison is placed into a cross on the ground, the victim walks over, and suddenly all things unravel. Well, that's a magical idea, no doubt, because obviously, physiologically, no poison is going to go through the callous feet of a peasant. But again, this is where you have to separate out what might be called the view from within from the view from without. According to Narcisse, he had the poison rubbed into his skin. And this would be important because the effective way for this powder to be administered would be through the blood.
All right, let's think about this for a second. We know that a certain set of brain alterations, diseases, or injuries could cause the zombie-like symptoms you see in the movies. That a mysterious poison has the power to mimic death, but is there any real proof that we can return from the dead? Well, let me tell you something. The living dead are living among us. And they're in Detroit.
At a warehouse in Detroit, something remarkable is happening. Inside these containers 103 people are waiting to return from the dead. This is a cryonic center. The people entombed here have made an incredible choice to have their bodies frozen after death, with the hope that science will one day bring them back to life. Ben Best is the president of the Cryonics Institute. He believes not only can we survive death, but that the people here haven't actually died.
We do call them patients because we don't regard them as being dead in an ultimate sense. I think in practice, be regarded as a hospital, because I think that's what we're doing. We're holding these metabolically challenged patients.
But can cryogenics work? It's a remarkable and controversial process.
Behind me are our cryostats. They hold liquid nitrogen, which is at minus 196 degrees Celsius. Each of these cylindrical units holds 6 patients.
Best believes cryogenics has changed our definition of death. Only a few decades ago, if your heart stopped, that was it.
But it's just not the way we see things anymore.
How do you keep someone who is dead alive? It begins by pumping oxygen-rich blood throughout the body. This keeps cells alive and avoids damage caused by rigor mortis. Then, the body must be cooled.
We don't just drop the patient in a liquid nitrogen. That kind of rapid cooling would be very damaging. So we try to cool in a controlled manner. If you cool too quickly, then you get too much cracking. We can't prevent cracking entirely, but certainly if you just drop the patient directly into liquid nitrogen, there'd be a lot of cracking and shattering. What we want to do is we want to cool as quickly as possible while the cryoprotectant, the medical grade antifreeze, is still in a liquid state. And then when it solidifies, we want to cool very slowly, because while it's in a liquid state, the idea, you want the colder the better. But when it becomes a solid, if you cool too quickly, you create thermal stress.
The body temperature is slowly lowered, first by an ice bath, and then in a cooling chamber where it will reach minus 196 degrees. Best believes this will preserve these bodies for hundreds or perhaps thousands of years. But why?
It seems to me as if you're preserving all the material there, that some future technology is going to be able to figure out a way to get that all fixed and going again. It's reasonable to think that nanomachines can restore the person to their original condition.
Nanomachines already exist. Tiny machines smaller than a single cell. Scientists believe they could soon flow through our bloodstream, targeting viruses, repairing organs, and destroying disease. Can cryogenics give us life after death? Could it even conquer death itself? Best believes it is our greatest hope for eternal living.
It doesn't seem so much more unreasonable than to speculate that people will someday live on Mars.
Can we die and wake up 1,000 years later and resume our lives? And even if we can, would we really want to? Or do we return as zombies, doomed to a mindless existence? Is life after death really life at all? Weird, or what? So there we have it. Stories of life after death from all over the world. In Connecticut, a man is overcome with emotion at a Civil War battlefield. Is he the reincarnation of a dead general? In England, scientists conduct a remarkable paranormal experiment. Did they find the first proof of the afterlife? And in Haiti, a man returns from the grave 18 years after his death. Are the living dead walking amongst us? Do zombies exist? Are these stories evidence of life after death? Can we dismiss those who claim they are true? You decide.
Join me again next time for more stories that will undoubtedly be weird or what?